You know, I've been a volunteer for a mission organization called the Encuentro. Been doing that for, since 1995. I was a youth pastor in Alabama when I first came across the Encuentro, and I'd led my first team that summer. And shortly after that, I became the youth pastor here at VNC, and I'd continued with my involvement with the Encuentro and was going to keep being a part of their team as a volunteer and leading teams to be going into Mexico. And the founder of the Encuentro, his name's Bob Bolton, and he called me and he said, "Hey, as we're gearing up and getting ready for our next Encuentro, I'd like to ask you to go with us into Monterrey, Mexico. We're gonna make a video and just talk about the Encuentro, and we're gonna share it with youth pastors all over the United States. And I'd like you to go and meet some of the pastors we're going to be working with and volunteering with." And I was so excited. I mean, it was because there was about 15 or 20 of us going in, and it was really kind of an opportunity for me. I felt like to be identified as one of the up-and-comers, as a young youth pastor. And you got to remember that, you know, this is pre-9/11. This was in the late 90s, and around 98, 99 in there. And I was just so honored and thrilled to be asked to go. And that I said yes, and I'll be there. And I got permission from VNC to leave and to go be a part of this trip. And you know, I was ready to go. And the itinerary was we'd go from Midway to San Antonio. And when we landed in San Antonio, then a van would pick us up, and they would take all the youth pastors into Mexico. And again, this was pre-9/11, and things have all changed since then. If you remember those times and you would fly, you could actually go all the way down the terminal with your guest and wait there as they got on the plane or as they got off the plane. And so that's kind of where we're at. And there was no security lines. There was nothing like that. But sometimes I have a curse and a gift in my life that sometimes I get excited and I get a little almost hyper, and I don't think about what I'm doing. And it's a curse and a gift because it's afforded me the ability to jump off bridges that I probably shouldn't have jumped off until you're about 6 feet below the bridge and you're like, what have I done? And that's where I live most of the time. My wife is the one going, "I don't know if we should do that." And I'm always going, it'll be fine. Well, I'm going to go and I'm going to be there. And back then, you didn't have to have a passport to get in Mexico. What you had to have was a photo ID, and your birth certificate would work, but you had to have both. You couldn't go. But a passport obviously worked, but you didn't have to have it. Well, as I was leaving to head to the airport, I was so excited that I was getting amped up, and that's the curse part. And I ran off and left on my desk my wallet, my birth certificate, and all my money. And I realized it as I am going into Midway. And, you know, my mind starts racing. I'm panicked. I had no way to prove who I was. I had no way to prove who I was. And, you know, again, pre-9/11, I was able just to plead with the Southwest Airlines, "I'm an idiot." And they bought it. And, I mean, there was no doubt. They were like, "Oh, that's true." And I was able to talk my way onto the plane. No ID. You imagine that today? You'd get shot, you know? They just tase you, carry you out, and throw you off the building. And so that was then. And they allowed me to get in and to go and get on the plane. And my mind is racing. I called my wife, Ashley, and I said, "Hey, here's what I need you to do. I need you to get to the office, and I need you to photocopy my birth certificate, my driver's license, and I need you to fax it to the hotel we're staying at in San Antonio." Now, if you were under 40, there was a telephone in my offices that paper shot out the bottom of it, and it was called fax machines. Very cool for the time. And so this fax machine, and she did, and I got to San Antonio, and we get over to the hotel, and I started thinking, because now also one of the things you need to understand about those fax machines, they were wonderful, but the paper that came out looked like an old Dead Sea Scroll. It was wound up tight and little, and it was just useless paper. So I'm thinking there's no way they're going to buy at the border that my birth certificate looks like a scroll. So, once again, it's a steel trap. So I get it as flat as I can. I've pressed it out. I've done all I can. And I'm thinking, this thing needs to look aged. So I go out into the parking lot. I'm not making this. I wish I was. But I was only about 25. And things make sense at 25. They don't today. So you don't want to share everything you did at 25. And so I take my paper out there. I've got it flat. And I start rubbing dirt on it. Because I'm thinking I can make it look aged. Then I start kind of crumbling it up. It's got to look wadded up. And then it hit me. It doesn't have the stamp of the birth certificate. So I go get a rock. And I start going in tiny circles. I wish I didn't, but I did. It made sense. And I'm doing this. And it hits me, this isn't going to work at all. I'm in deep trouble. I have no way to prove who I am. So I go to the leader, Bob Bolton, and I said, Bob, I'm in trouble. Here's what I've done, and I'm an idiot. He agreed. And he said, I said, Bob, what am I going to do? I don't want to miss this. I want to go to Mexico. I want to be on the video. How am I going to get in? And he said, well, here's what we'll do. We're going to deal with it at the border. And I'm thinking to myself, that is a terrible idea. I mean, I don't want to spend a week at the border until you get back. And he said, no, we got this. We'll take care of it at the border. So we began driving from San Antonio to Laredo, Texas, and we're on our way, and it is 3 a.m. We hit the Laredo border area, and we go to this hotel called the Laredo Inn. Now, unless something drastically has changed, just words of advice from Uncle Sean, if you see on Airbnb a deal at the Laredo Inn, don't go. It is not a nice place. It was a little scary. And I would have had my hand on my wallet if I had one. And so Bob goes to the front desk, and he begins talking in a little bit of Spanish, and the guy is talking back in a little bit of English, and they're going back and forth. And he says to the guy, he gives him a pager number, and Bob calls this pager number. Now, again, if you're under 40, pager was this little box we used to wear on our belt that you could call. Now, you couldn't do anything else with it but go, someone called me. Useless device. Fax machines, handy. Pagers, terrible. And this guy starts driving down the road in this Maverick, now this old Maverick car, and it has been in so many accidents, it drives crooked. And this car is rolling up, and we're standing outside the Laredo Inn, and there are bungee cords that have fastened the trunk to what's left of the metal of the car. And this gentleman gets out. He undoes the safety precautions of the bungee cord. The lid comes up, again, crooked. And he begins doing stuff in this paperwork, and him and Bob are communicating a little bit of English, a little bit of Spanish. And then this guy takes out, and he starts stamping it. And he's doing this stuff with this paper. And I am looking at him, and I don't know what's going on. And I'm thinking, I am getting in the back of this Maverick. He's getting me in the country. He's smuggling me in the trunk. And then he looks at me, and he stands up, and he goes, $25. $25? I don't even have a wallet. Bob pays the money, and with this big smile and 3 teeth in his head, he goes, welcome to Mexico. You are now one. You're a citizen of my country. And for $25, we bought a dual citizenship to Mexico. I had no photo ID. I don't have anything but my scroll of a birth certificate. And now I have an affidavit that says I'm a sworn citizen of the country of Mexico. And he said, you got to go to this gate, you got to talk to this agent, and this is how you will get in the country. And see, it's one of those things that when things are out of focus, when we can't see clearly, because it's hard to identify who we really are, it's when things get in focus that we begin to see clearly. Now, I had no way of proving who I was. And the same thing with Jesus. He had no way. There was no birth certificate. There was no driver's license. There was no student ID or passport. Many of the people who came on to Jesus and met Jesus, they didn't realize exactly who he was. In fact, when he was to be arrested, his betrayer, Judas, had to kiss him on the cheek to let the soldiers know he was the one. There was nothing outstanding about his appearance that made everybody go, oh, that must be Jesus. But see, there's a question that I believe is burning in 2019 for you and I in this room that we have to answer today before you leave. It's the same question that was stewing then. And it is, we have to answer this question. We have to figure out who Jesus is. We have to answer that question. I mean, there's been all kinds of diverse answers to that question. I mean, even during his life on earth, there were people that were asking, who are you? Who are you? I mean, some said that Jesus was just a demon-possessed man. Some said he was a good teacher, maybe even a prophet. Some said that he was a liar, that he was brilliant. Some called him God. Some said he was insane. Some said he was just a blasphemer. So we got to ask that question, who is Jesus? Hebrews 1:3 says this. It says, we are told Jesus is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature. He is the radiance of the glory of God. Now today, we use the YouVersion Bible app, and it has all of the verses and quotes that you'll see up on the screen. They will be on the screen so you can follow along. But if you go to the YouVersion Bible app, you go to live event, you'll see V and C, and you can follow with us there. Lee Strobel, some of you may know this story. He was an investigative reporter for the Chicago Tribune. And after his wife gave her heart to Jesus and became a follower of Christ, they were living in their condo, and he was a devout atheist. He could not bear the thought that his wife had accepted this myth of Jesus. And so he began investigating the claims of who Jesus said he is. And he went at it with abandonment. And as an investigative reporter, he's going to write this article that is going to debunk who Jesus is. And he went to work hard, and he researched for almost 2 years. Now, Lee Strobel is not your just everyday guy. I mean, he had degrees from Yale and other universities. He was a smart man, and he had done his research. And so he began interviewing people. He began going back to original text, and he was reading anything he could find and trying to figure out, who is this Jesus? Mostly, he wanted to just prove that he was not who he said he was. And after almost 2 years of research, he sits down with a legal pad and he creates 2 columns, the pros and the cons, and he begins listing them and putting them. And at the end of the day, sitting at his kitchen table, he came to this conclusion that Jesus is who he says he is. And he gives his heart to the Lord, and he actually has a date, November 8th, 1981. And he took all of his findings, all of his research, and he publishes in a book called The Case for Christ. And he came away with this basic premise that you've heard before. This basic premise that said this: either Jesus was a liar, he was a lunatic, or he is who he says he was. And see, some people said, yeah, he must be a liar, because that's one of the possibilities, that everything he said he did and all that's just lies. He was a con man. Maybe he was a lunatic. He's just crazy. You know, in our lifetimes, everybody in this room, there have been people that have claimed to be God, and they're lunatics. They are just bat crazy. Nothing we can do about it. They're crazy. Maybe he's just a lunatic. Or he is who he says he is. Now, Jesus' story was powerful. It was unbelievably powerful. We don't know much about his childhood to his ministry began, but we do know about his birth, and we do know about his ministry, and we know about the last week, the crucifixion and resurrection. But at the end of the day, for Jesus, there were 2 groups that really became so ticked off that he was threatening their way of life. There was the self-righteous, and there was the politically elite. And it was a weird blend of the religious right and the political and the wealthy. For the most part, Jesus was not criticized. He was not criticized for these things. He was not criticized for his character. He was not criticized for morality or being dishonest or even being cruel. In fact, he was refreshing in the way that he dealt with women, the way he dealt with children, the way he dealt with foreigners, the way he dealt with what the Bible calls the least of these, those that are hurting, down and out. Jesus had a way of taking all of those people and bringing value to them in cultures that had no value for them. I mean, the Romans would sacrifice children. None of the cultures had value for women. None of them. They were traded commodities, but not Jesus. And if you were a foreigner, not a way of the life, then they had no use for you. And the poor were just a nuisance. But Jesus had a way of looking at them and taking care of them and finding compassion and loving them. It was actually his teaching and popularity that drew fire for this. Because his popularity, because he brought value to all people, Pilate even said there's no basis for the charges. Jesus didn't do anything to be arrested. Nothing. See, what got him in trouble, what really got him in trouble with those two groups is he raised Lazarus from the dead. He raised Lazarus from the dead. He had done all kinds of unbelievable miracles up to that point, but as far as we know, he had not done that before. And it actually says that when he raises Lazarus from the dead, it says he wept. Jesus wept. Shortest verse in the Bible, 2 words, Jesus wept. Now, a lot of people say, well, he was grieving because he was taking Lazarus from heaven to bring him back to earth, and maybe he was grieving because that was his buddy, his best friend, and he couldn't stand to see all of the other people grieving at the loss. Maybe, it could be. Maybe he was also grieving because he knew what just took place. By raising Lazarus from the dead, now he knew what the beginning was. See, the chief priests and the Pharisees in verses following that, they got together in the Sanhedrin. And when you first read that, you think, that's not a big deal. That the chief priests and the Pharisees getting together, they surely were friends, right? No, they weren't. In fact, they couldn't stand each other. They were at odds with each other. It doesn't sound like much, but that was for that meeting to be productive was an absolute miracle in itself because they just didn't agree on things. But what they did was a guy named Caiaphas. He goes, hey, we can't have this. He just raised somebody from the dead. You know what's going to happen? You know what's going to take place now? They're going to make him king. And then Rome's going to come down, and they're going to take our temple, and they're going to take our power. They're going to take the way we do church, and they're going to take our money away. They said, we can't have this. So now we just don't need to shut him up. We got to quiet this guy. We got to quiet his followers we have to eradicate him. We got to take care of him. And they went to all lengths to make this happen. They started out by bribing one of his disciples. They fabricated charges. They started doing whatever they could. In fact, they beat him as a common criminal. They did everything they could to embarrass and abuse him. They could not have the son of a carpenter wrecking their world. No longer was he just needed to be punished, but he had to die. Little did they know or understand that their evil was going to be used for good. See, Jesus would transform all humanity for all time by the resurrection. The resurrection changed everything. The resurrection of Jesus changed absolute everything. All of time shifted. Tim Keller says this, if Jesus rose from the dead, then you have to accept all that he said. If he didn't rise from the dead, then why worry about any of what he said? The issue on which everything hangs is not whether or not you like his teaching, but whether or not he rose from the dead. See, even a most devout atheist who doesn't believe in any of this understands that history was changed by the resurrection. And if that is true, and if we believe that today, then we have to believe everything he said, not just some of it. Because if we only believe a piece of it, then who's the lunatic? If we only believe parts of it we like, then who's really crazy? So this question of who do you say Jesus is? Who do you say Jesus is one that's got to be answered in your life. It's got to be answered in my life. So we're going to start in John chapter 20 and go through this passage. And this is after the triumphal entry. This is after what we call Palm Sunday. This is after the Last Supper. This was after the washing of the disciples' feet. This was after the mock trial. This was after Pilate. This was after the beatings. This was after the crucifixion. This was after the silence. This day is what takes place in the early morning. In John 20, verse 1, it says this, Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved. And he said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they've put him." Now, men, like we've talked about, had a place of honor, especially in this culture. They would have had the voice, the vote. They would have been the one respected. Women did not. I've always found the irony here that it was Mary, the woman, who was looking for Jesus in the dark. She was the one wanting to see Jesus. It wasn't the guys. Now, for you to understand who Mary Magdalene is, then there's all kinds of rumors, but if we just take what is in Scripture, she was a woman who was demon-possessed. And after Jesus removed the demons out of her life, she became a follower. And she was there at the crucifixion. She was there throughout the ministry. And she is there that morning. She understands who Jesus is, but she's trying to figure out and answer that question. Who is Jesus to me now, today? Verse 3 says this, "So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him, and he went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in the place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went inside. He saw and believed." They still don't understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. "Then the disciple went back to where they were staying." Now, I'm not sure where they were going to. I'm not sure where they were hiding. I'm not sure where they were held up. I'm not sure why they ran. I'm not sure why it was important for us to understand one outran the other. Who knows what they were thinking? Who knew why it's important to understand about the linens and folded or not folded? But the line that just keeps eating at me was, "Then the disciples went back to where they were staying." Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was confusion. Maybe it was anxiety. Maybe those things doused the flame of excitement. That's why they ran. Maybe when they were there, they were maybe feeling a little guilty that they had not hung around during the crucifixion. Maybe they were feeling a little guilty over not believing everything. Maybe they felt like they should have done more, done less. Who knows? But they took off running to see what was taking place. When Mary says they've taken the body, they take off to go check it out. And when they see the body's gone, they went back to the room. Verse 11 says, "Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. And they asked her, 'Woman, why are you crying?' 'They have taken my Lord away,' she said, 'and I don't know where they've put him.' At this, she turned around and she saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. And he asked her, 'Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you're looking for?' Thinking he was the gardener, she said, 'Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him.' Now, Mary's grieving, and maybe she's a little angry. They took his body. Maybe she thought it was a cruel joke. Wherever the boys went to hide, I don't know. But she's asking anybody, where's the body? I mean, I envision this small, petite woman going, 'I will carry the body. Just tell me what you did with him. Tell me where you're hiding him, and I'll go get him.' See, everything is out of focus. Fear, anxiety, confusion do not allow us to focus. And that's where it is. And this question of who is Jesus, and all of a sudden we're just looking for the body. He's just looking for the body. Verse 16, "And Jesus said to her, 'Mary.' And she turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, 'Rabboni.' And Jesus said, 'Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God.' And Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, 'I have seen the Lord.' And she told them what she had seen in these things to her. He called her by name, and everything came into focus. See, there is power in understanding who you are. There's power in this name. And Mary's response back is actually very powerful. Mary's response back is just something that kind of steps out. See, Jesus was identified as rabbi all through Scripture. That's not new. He was teaching in the synagogues. He was teaching in the temples. He was teaching in the streets. He was teaching in boats setting on water. He was teaching in fields. He was doing things that he taught all the time. So to call him rabbi made sense. To say you are a rabbi, that's not shocking at all. But see, to say Rabboni, that's different. What she was saying is, you're not just a teacher, you're my teacher. Rabboni means my teacher. What she was saying is, I know you, I trust you, I love you, I believe you, and you are mine. Now, maybe she had said it earlier. Maybe that was common amongst the disciples, but it is the only time recorded in Scripture where it says, Rabboni, you are my teacher. See, in the ancient world, a person became a disciple by seeking out a rabbi. See, in Judaism and philosophical Greek world, the initiative lied with the student, not the teacher. But see, with Jesus, the teacher chose the students. With Jesus, everything changed. In John 15, he said, you do not choose me, but I choose you and appointed you so you might go and bear fruit that will last, so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. He meant for them to take that literally. Everybody had a rabbi. Everybody wanted to be a student. And at a very young age, children would begin to pick their rabbi. I'm sure they were guided by their fathers because they had a voice and opinion. They would say, this is what we're going to believe. This is what we're going to do. And rabbis would take these children and begin to teach them everything they knew. And they would begin to walk with them, but there were tests along the way. There were tests. They had to have memorization. They had to have wisdom. And they would begin this process of helping people along the way. But what the rabbi would have to do, because rabbis want the cream of the crop. Rabbis really want the best. And so if you weren't measuring up, they began making cuts. So children would have to go home. As they got older, they would have to take on the family business or learn a new trade. Because rabbis typically wanted the brightest, the best. They wanted those that they appeared to be gifted. They wanted somebody that they could show off. So when we see in Matthew 4, when Jesus rolls up and he sees a group of boys that are fishing and he says, follow me, he turned everything upside down. Because those boys had already been cut. They had a rabbi say, you're not good enough. They had a rabbi say, you're not worthwhile. They had a rabbi say, you're not going to measure up. And so when Jesus says, hey, follow me, those guys had to be looking around like, are you kidding me? You want me? Do you know who I am? Do you know anything about me? And Jesus says, follow me. See, it's a display of ultimate authority. It was God in flesh pursuing his own followers. Absolutely unique in the ancient world. See, each person receives this call from God through Christ, and the nature of that call is very simple. Follow me. It puts us in a learner relationship with Jesus. See, in traditional settings, the teacher offers teaching, knowledge. It's from the chin up. See, in traditional settings, it's all about learning what's in your head. I'm just going to give you facts and figures, and you take it in and you believe it. And Jesus said, listen, I'm going to teach you some of that stuff, but I'm more concerned about your heart and what you really believe, not what you know. This changed everything. In this learner relationship with Jesus, it takes the tradition and it throws it upside down, and he rejected it because he offered himself to the disciples. See, this call to discipleship, this call to be in relationship is more than an intellectual encounter. That's why you can't just know about him. You got to know him. You can't just talk about Jesus. You can't just talk about Scripture. There are plenty of people that have tons of biblical knowledge, and they don't know Jesus from Adam. See, the relationship with Jesus, when you are in relationship, it's not just knowledge. It's, I want to walk like him. I want to talk like him. I want to know what he knows. I want to treat people the way he treats people. I want to talk to people the way he talks to people and treats them. I want to be like the rabbi. And what the rabbi wants to hear is not just more information. What the rabbi wants to hear is, you're my Rabboni. You're my teacher. Rabbis long to hear that. See, in Luke chapter 9, verse 18, we see this. Once, when Jesus was praying in private and his disciples were with him, he asked them, who do the crowds say I am? And they replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others. Then one of the prophets of long ago has come back to life. But he says, but what about you? What about you? Who do you say I am? And Peter answered, God's Messiah. See, I believe in my interpretation of this, I believe there'd been all this excitement, and I believe that Jesus is talking to his crew, and he is asking them, and he baits them. Hey, what's everybody saying about me? And they start talking. Excuse me. Some say you're Moses. Some say Elijah. Some maybe you're just a great prophet that we don't even know about. And I kind of envision with those eyes, because Jesus had those eyes. The eyes that saw the mountains and the rivers and the seas and the creatures all get created at that time. I think Jesus, with those same eyes, maybe fiddling with something in the dirt, he looks up to his crew and he says, but what about you? What about you? Who do you say I am? Who do you say I am? And see, if Lee Strobel is right, he's a lunatic, a liar, he is who he says he is, then you and I have to answer that question. Mary Magdalene had to answer that question. His disciples had to answer that question. And I think you and I have to answer that question. See, at VNC, you've heard us talk about this. We want to take you and help you take the next step in your spiritual journey, that the hopeful become walkers, the walkers become runners, and the runners become soarers. And for you to begin that process, to take the next step in your spiritual journey, you have to answer this question. Who is Jesus? Who is Jesus? See, who is he going to be to you? See, I believe that there are folks here today that it's Easter, and this is just what you ought to do, you should do, you must do. You're on a time schedule. I get it. It's a holiday. There's a ham in the oven. I'm with you. We got time. We got a few minutes. But what I am asking for you to do is it would be a tragedy today for you to leave and not have answered that question. There comes a point in time in your spiritual journey where you have to move beyond just head knowledge to heart. And you got to answer that question. Who is Jesus going to be? One of the things that I love is we celebrated 10 years Christmas Eve in this building. And on this carpet, underneath this carpet is concrete, and there are names. Some of your names are written on this floor as we gather as a church in very cold temperatures, and we wrote names of family and friends that we are praying for. There are names written that maybe there were images drawn and names that are written that may not even been born yet. They just said, my future child, granddaughter, my son's spouse, whatever it may be. They're written there. This past Christmas Eve, we were redoing this stage and preparing that this wood flooring up here, on the bottom of it, there are names, new people. As 10 years, we have it. I can promise you, some of you, the names that are written on the bottom of this stage are in this room right now. For the moment in time on Easter Sunday to answer that question, who is Jesus going to be to you?